It started with tension in the air, palpable, thick, impossible to ignore. The crowd was roaring, the stakes couldn't have been higher, and every eye was locked on the league's brightest star, Caitlin Clark. Then, in a blink, it was gone, the white. Energy drained from the arena like someone had ripped the soul out of the game. Caitlin Clark, the face of the WNBA's resurgence, had just been ejected. No one could believe what they were seeing. The call wasn't just controversial, it was catastrophic. A second technical foul, dealt swiftly and without hesitation, sent Clark walking off the court with disbelief etched across her face. This wasn't a bench player getting tossed in garbage time. This was the league's crown jewel, a generational talent who had changed the trajectory of women's basketball overnight. Her ejection wasn't just a ruling, it was a message, and it sent shockwaves through the entire league. Clark walked to the locker room in stunned silence. The fans froze. Her teammates, her sisters in battle, stood paralyzed until two players stepped forward. Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Ho didn't just react, they ignited. In that moment, the game changed. Lexie's voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. "This is a joke. Protect your stars," she yelled, her fists clenched, not in rage, but in disbelief. Her face was flushed, her stance defiant, like she'd just watched the league turn its back on its future. Beside her, Sophie stood not with fire, but with steel. She didn't need to scream. Her presence alone radiated resistance. Together, they weren't just two teammates defending a friend. They were the voice of every fan who had felt injustice rising all season long. They turned toward the officials, the coaches, the cameras, and the league itself, and without hesitation, they said, "Enough." The league may have silenced Clark that night, but they could not extinguish the fire she sparked in her teammates. That fire was about to consume the entire WNBA. The protest didn't end at the bench. Sophie and Lexie stepped onto the hardwood with purpose in every stride. Their eyes were locked on the officiating crew. Their movements were sharp, deliberate, and heavy with meaning. Resistance pulsed through every word they spoke. Fans in the arena and watching at home could feel it. This wasn't just about one call. This was about a pattern, a problem, a league that had been turning away from both. They didn't just complain. They demanded answers. Sophie's calm steeliness and Lexie's explosive passion collided to form the perfect storm. The referees, visibly rattled, threatened to eject them both, but neither flinched. Lexie's stare was ice-cold, daring them to make another mistake. Sophie's silence roared louder than any protest. They weren't just defending Clark. They were defending the very soul of the game. This wasn't a tantrum. This was strategy. It was control. It was the boiling point of months of watching a league fail to protect its players. Lexie and Sophie weren't speaking for one athlete anymore. They were standing up for an entire generation of women who had been told to sit down and take it. And this was the moment they decided not to. Every step Lexie took screamed defiance. Her posture was rewriting the rule book. She wasn't just reacting to a call, she was confronting a culture. The coded interviews, the whisper campaigns, the double standards, all of it burst out of her in one electrifying act of rebellion. Then Sophie stepped beside her, measured, composed, but unshakably firm. Her clarity only amplified Lexie's fire. Together, they were steel meeting flame. The referees had no answer. Fans felt it in their bones. This wasn't immaturity, it was courage. Sophie didn't have to raise her voice. Her loyalty spoke for her. One look at her eyes and you knew. Caitlin Clark would never walk alone again. This wasn't a tweet. It wasn't a post-game presser. It was accountability, live and unfiltered. The broadcast couldn't hide it. Cameras zoomed in. Commentators went quiet. Even ESPN's notoriously neutral crew couldn't mask the tremble in their voices. Something bigger than basketball was happening. It was unfolding minute by minute as if the league itself was on trial. What no one in the WNBA's front office could have predicted was the ripple effect. In the stands, young girls in Clark jerseys rose to their feet. They screamed with Lexi. They stood with Sophie. Social media didn't just erupt in outrage, it exploded in inspiration. This wasn't just sports anymore. This was a cultural shift, authored by two women who had finally had enough, and the tension didn't die at halftime. It boiled. It simmered. It threatened to overflow. Lexi and Sophie didn't just walk back to the bench. They walked back as leaders of a movement. Not one born in press conferences or front offices, but in the heat of the moment, under the brightest lights, when silence was no longer an option. And from that moment on, nothing in the WNBA would be the same. They marched to the locker room, followed by cameras, phones, and a chorus of whispers. Inside the tunnel, away from the roar of the crowd, they weren't cooling down. They were gearing up. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Sources close to the team later revealed that the locker room turned into a war room. Players who had once hesitated to speak found their voices. Veterans and rookies, once divided by experience, were now united by frustration. They circled around Lexi and Sophie and said one thing: "We stand with Caitlin." The ejection had become a rallying cry. The injustice, a banner of unity. Back on the court, the atmosphere was thick with unease. The referees moved awkwardly. Coaches exchanged tense glances. Everyone felt it. Something irreversible had been set in motion. The game carried on, but basketball had taken a back seat. What mattered now was the message, the movement, the moment. While it all unfolded, Caitlin Clark sat in the locker room, her eyes fixed on the screen as the replay of her ejection looped over and over. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was fury, held tight. She wasn't crying. She wasn't panicking. She was remembering every uncalled foul, every elbow to the ribs, every shrug from officials. Every time someone told her to just toughen up, the fire in her eyes said more than words ever could. This ends now, because this wasn't the first time. And everyone watching knew it wouldn't be the last. All season, she'd been shoved, elbowed, cheap-shotted, and ridiculed. Her greatness didn't draw protection. It drew punishment. And the league's failure to intervene wasn't just an oversight. It was the true offense. The numbers backed it up. Cold clinical data revealed a chilling truth. Over 17% of the league's flagrant fouls were directed at one player, Caitlin Clark, and the Chicago Sky accounted for 80% of them. That should have been a headline. That should have triggered emergency meetings, but it didn't. There were no statements, no fines, no protective policies, just silence. The same silence that followed every cheap shot, the same silence that hung heavy every time Clark got penalized for reacting. The same silence that drowned every cry for fairness. Lexi Ho didn't just break that silence, she set it on fire. And Sophie Cunningham poured gasoline on it with every steady, unwavering stare. Lexi didn't just yell for justice. She risked her career. Players have been blackballed for far less, labeled as too emotional, too outspoken. But Lexi didn't care. When your teammate, your friend, your sister is punished for being great, what else is there to lose? Sophie's role was just as vital. Her power came not from volume, but from presence. She didn't need a microphone. Her refusal to step aside was the protest. Her stillness echoed louder than any speech. When she stood shoulder to shoulder with Lexi, they transformed protest into unity. This wasn't just two friends defending, a teammate. It was the formation of a frontline live, visible, undeniable, and fans noticed. Viewership spiked. The clip of Clark's ejection went viral. Everyone had something to say. Sports talk shows, influencers, celebrities, people who had never commented on the WNBA were suddenly invested. The conversation spilled far beyond the court. It wasn't just about a missed call anymore. It was about accountability. representation, institutional failure. Sponsors took notice. Brands that had poured millions into the league started making quiet calls. They didn't want to be tied to a league that couldn't protect its biggest investment. Emails were sent, meetings scheduled, damage control was in motion. But this wasn't a PR problem. It was foundational. The house was cracking, and the storm hadn't even hit yet. Then the legends spoke. Kevin Garnett, Paul George, voices that carried weight. They didn't tiptoe around the issue. They called it what it was, a failure to protect your stars. And their voices didn't just carry opinions, they carried pressure. Pressure the league could no longer ignore. Lexie Ho's name started trending. Sophie Cunningham's jersey sales soared. Their post-game words were clipped, replayed, quoted, and dissected. They were no longer just players. They were something bigger. And Caitlin Clark, she didn't say much. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes, because now she had an army behind her. Behind closed doors, league officials scrambled. Emergency meetings were held, PR strategies were drawn up, conversations with owners turned tense and urgent. But beneath the scramble and spin, everything boiled down to one terrifying question. What if Caitlin Clark leaves? What if the player who reignited the league, who brought millions of new fans and breathed life into every arena she stepped into, walks away and never looks back? Because the offers are coming in. European powerhouses, Asian super teams, private leagues backed by billionaire investors who see what the WNBA refuses to acknowledge, that Clark is the future. They're ready to build around her, to offer her everything she's been denied: respect, protection, resources, control, safety, power, a league that values her not just for her fame, but for her humanity. And the fans, loyal, passionate, unshakably devoted, are torn. They love the league. They love the game. But their hearts are breaking watching what Clark has been forced to endure. They tweet, they post, they cry out. She deserves better. They know that without her, something sacred might vanish. The stands might empty. The cameras might fade. The momentum that has carried women's basketball into the mainstream might sputter. Sophie Cunningham knows it too. That's why she keeps showing up with fire in her heart and steel in her spine. Not just for Clark, but for every young girl in the stands. For every future star who dreams of one day standing under those lights. Because if the WNBA can't protect Caitlin Clark, what message are they sending to the next generation? Lexie. Hull refuses to let that message stand. She sees the writing on the wall. She's rewriting it. Her defiance isn't reckless, it's visionary. She isn't protesting just to push back. She's demanding that the league evolve or get left behind. Her fire is a mirror held up to the WNBA, and what it reflects is uncomfortable, but undeniable. This is no longer about one call, one game, or even one player. This is about power, about change, about whether the WNBA has the courage to grow or the arrogance to stagnate. Because the clock is ticking, the world is watching, and there is no more room for excuses. Not from referees, not from executives, not from anyone who claims to care about women's basketball. Lexie Hull, Sophie Cunningham, and Caitlin Clark have drawn the line. And on one side is truth. On the other is silence. The league has to choose which side it's on. Because this moment, this rebellion, this resistance, it won't be forgotten. It will define a generation. And when history looks back, it won't ask what happened that night. It will ask who had the courage to stand and who chose to stay silent. In those few minutes, the Indiana Fever stopped being just another team. They became the epicenter of a reckoning. The crowd, stunned at first, roared its approval. Fans in the arena and online rallied behind them. "Protect your stars," they chanted. Over and over, the game had changed. Clark would never face the storm alone again. But the storm wasn't new. The problem ran far deeper than one call. This had been building for months. Season-long brutality aimed at one player. Elbows to the ribs, hits to the head, flagrant fouls that mysteriously slipped, past officiating. And every time, instead of being shielded, Clark was penalized, punished for reacting, for being vocal, for daring to shine too brightly. Sophie and Lexi had watched it happen in silence. That silence ended the moment Clark was ejected. Their protest wasn't just for her. It was for every player who's ever been told to suck it up, to be grateful for the spotlight, to take the abuse and smile through it. The system wasn't flawed, it was cracked wide open, and the only way to fix it was to expose it. That night, it was exposed in front of the entire country. The fans weren't blind. They had seen Clark take hit after hit. They were tired of pretending it was part of the game. The energy in the arena shifted from entertainment to uprising. Cheers turned into chants. Applause became activism. The WNBA wasn't facing criticism, it was facing a movement. One powered by loyalty, frustration, and a demand for justice. And then came the numbers. The data was impossible to ignore. More than 17% of all flagrant fouls in the league had targeted one player, Clark. One team, the Chicago Sky, was responsible for nearly 80% of them. That wasn't an anomaly. That was a pattern. That was a scandal. And the fans were done pretending. It wasn't happening. Each time Clark stood her ground, every time she so much as flinched in frustration, she was punished. Lexi Hull called it out without hesitation. Systemic favoritism. Sophie Cunningham didn't soften the truth either. She named the silence for what it was. Deliberate, not ignorance, not oversight, deliberate. And now, the league has a choice. Not just for Clark. Not just for Lexi. Not just for Sophie. But for every young girl watching, wondering if this game will ever truly be hers. Because rebellion doesn't start with rage. It starts with love. And what they did that night? That was love. Made visible. They weren't speculating. They were exposing. The betrayal cut deep. Caitlin Clark wasn't just another rookie. She was the reason arenas were sold out, why jerseys flew off shelves, and why millions finally tuned in. She was the WNBA's lifeline, and yet the league treated her like a threat. Instead of celebrating her, they tried to contain her. That contradiction enraged fans and empowered critics. How could a league claim progress while sacrificing the very woman carrying it forward? The optics were bad, but the message was worse. Success doesn't guarantee protection. And Clark's bruises, both visible and hidden, were proof. The comparisons came fast. Analysts and fans alike began invoking the name of Michael Jordan. In his early NBA days, Jordan took brutal punishment from defenders like the Pistons until the league adapted. The rules changed. Officials began protecting him because he was the game. Now Clark is in that same role, but without any of the safeguards.